Hello and welcome to another episode of the Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast. On this episode, we're going to be talking about another championship won in Pittsburgh. And as usual, joining me on my trip down memory lane is my co-host,
Tim Hannon.
And so on this episode, we'll be discussing the Super Bowl 43, the regular season and the playoffs. And then in the sequel, we'll just go over the Super Bowl. We're going to discuss the 2008 season, and the Steelers really had to really go through this season, navigate through it. It was really one of the most grueling schedules in the history of the NFL, and they had a lot of injuries they overcame. And this veteran team, they turned in one of the most resilient performances in team history, and for that perseverance, they were rewarded with a championship. So just a little background on what was going on at the good old 2008 there, 2007. After Super Bowl 40, Bill Cowher, the longtime coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think at that time he might have been one of the longest tenured coaches in the league, probably. They had finished the next season with a severe Super Bowl hangover, and they had a 8-8 record, and Cowher, of course, retired. So the Steelers were looking for a new head coach. And so they interviewed a little-known assistant from the Minnesota Vikings named Mike Tomlin. And I think he was the defensive coordinator, and they were like, nobody had ever heard of him. You know, he'd been around the league for a little bit, but not a terrible amount of time. So, and everybody said, okay, this is just a Rooney Rule interview. Nobody expected much, but lo and behold, Mike Tomlin gets hired. So in Tomlin's first year, which would have been the year before this, they make the playoffs, but they lose to the first round into the Jacksonville Jaguars. And the Steelers, they're still a veteran team. They've had success, and they're just a couple seasons removed from winning a Super Bowl. So they're pretty set that way going. So what else that goes on that offseason? They draft Rashard Mendenhall. And Dennis Dixon, if you remember, he played quarterback at Oregon, also was like a baseball center fielder. And, of course, the immortal key piece to our championship teams, Limas Swede.
Yeah.
Other offseason stuff that had happened, the Penguins had made the Cup final, but they had lost to Detroit in 6 games of a score by 3-2 at the Mellon Arena. And a fun fact was Mike Tomlin was actually watching the game outside with 3,000 fans on the Jumbotron.
Nice.
So, he's a man of the people, I guess. I don't know if he could do that now, but back then, I guess he was anonymous enough he could. So, in May, ESPN the magazine had done a survey, and they had, I guess, of 80,000 fans, and it was the ultimate fan satisfaction ranking, and the Steelers ranked as the 25th best major sports franchise out of 122 teams. So that was the 4 major sports: MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL. Sorry, lacrosse and WNBA, who probably didn't exist at that point. So they only finished one position behind the crosstown Pittsburgh Penguins, and they were 6th among all NFL teams. So pretty cool little thing. Another weird thing that happened that doesn't happen a lot with the Steelers, and this is a good thing. There was some ownership drama, Tim. Can you believe it? So the Rooneys had to divest themselves from the racetracks that some of the family had owned since the days of the Chief. See, the Chief, and we'd done this in the Chief episode, he was always more into horse. He was a better horse horse handicapper, I guess is that the word I'm looking for. And he owned horse tracks. And so some of his children owned horse tracks. And for some reason, the NFL decided that would be a conflict of interest for the ownership to own gambling interests and own an NFL team at the same time. So on July 11th, it was confirmed that a guy named Stanley Druckenmiller had been in discussion with the 5 Rooney brothers. This guy had been known to paint his face black and gold for the Steeler games. He's sort of a hedge fund guy. He has ties to George Soros. Make whatever you will of that. I honestly think this was a play by the Jerry Jones and the Daniel Snyders and the Robert Krafts of the world to weaken the Rooneys, to try and like weaken their ownership of the team, because there's always kind of been factions of owners in the NFL, and like it was always them. The Rooneys were always with them, and the guy who used to own the Panthers. And I've noticed that like, then remember the guy from the Panthers got like thrown out of the Carolina for like there wasn't some lame reason or something, or I don't know.
I thought it was like a sexual harassment thing, maybe.
Was it? I don't know.
But don't
it
quote me
seemed,
on that.
Yeah, I don't know. It seemed like a pretty weak reasoning. So I think it really becomes more hypocritical, because since then, now the NFL has a sponsorship with DraftKings and FanDuel and Caesars. So, okay, so why do the Rooneys had to divest themselves again? Please tell me why. I don't know. I guess 2008 gambling wasn't legal like it is now.
Yeah, that's really been a culture shift over the last 10 years or so, probably even more recently than that. That all of a sudden now, it was always like unspoken. Remember, like Al Michaels used to always like do these, like drop these little gambling, hints during the game, and people would be like, "Oh my gosh, Michael's talking about gambling again." But you're right. The NFL just finally embraced it. It did help that it's like now legal in a bunch of states. I think that was the other problem. It was like, oh well, we don't know anything about any illegal gambling. We wouldn't want people to bet on our games, even though that's skyrockets the interest in our product. So it was very hypocritical, and now it's like, at least now everybody can just be honest about it.
Yeah, and I don't see how owning a racetrack is going to cause any conflict of interest with owning a football team.
Yeah, and why wasn't it a problem for the 80 years before that?
Yeah,
because like you said, Art Rooney owned. I mean, that was his gig for decades. So why was it all of a sudden a problem in 2008? Who knows?
Oh, because Robert Kraft needed more power. You tell me it isn't. I can't tell me any different that he doesn't have way too much pull in that league. So.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with that, because I don't have another good reason why that was a big deal. So,
well, he kind of got his too when, if you're going to start to throw around stuff about Jerry Richardson down in Carolina, look who got caught in the massage. I mean, yeah, I'm one of the people to defend. He isn't married. If he wants to go down there and do that, I mean, yeah, it's not probably a right thing to do, but it is illegal. Who cares? As long as they're consenting adults, I really don't care what you do.
Well, I think with that, there was some dispute over whether they were consenting adults, because there could have been a trafficking situation and all that. But
I thought that was more Deshaun Watson. I'm not Robert Kraft, but.
Well, yeah, I mean, regardless, to your point, the Rooneys were different. Dan Rooney was definitely like the last of a dying breed at that point, and the folks you mentioned are definitely the people who were striving for and who kind of have the power now.
Although Snyder might be on his way out, but that's because he's just an idiot.
But to your point, he has a lot of power, because he should have been out years ago.
Well,
and they're all afraid of him.
Yeah, there's rumors he has like all kinds of like, dirt on everybody.
Right.
So
right.
I don't know. Maybe you saw like, Art Rooney the third going into, I don't know, a Cleveland Browns bar or something. He was wearing a Cleveland Brown. He was wearing a Jim Brown jersey. Oh no, it's a scandal. But that's probably about the most scandalous thing that guy's ever done. He's like,
let's hope so.
Let's hope so.
I used to think the same thing about people like Bill Cosby and Lance Armstrong.
Isn't that a shame? That's another case of like Bill Cosby did all this great stuff through his whole career. Like, was this, and then like something at the end there, he just totally screwed. He ruined everything else he ever did.
Yeah.
That you might be like, well, he was right on this, but it's like, yeah, he raped people. Well, there you go. You can't, you totally screwed your reputation and everything you've ever said about it. So I guess there's a lesson there somewhere, right?
Yeah, don't do bad, horrible things. That's the lesson.
Yeah. At any point in your life, yes.
Right.
So moving on, so they did fix that and they got their ownership settled. And so what happened was some of the family had to sell to the other parts of the family, and they've ended up like Jimmy Haslam was an investor, and I think the guy David Tepper from Carolina. So that it's been actually a good thing for the NFL. It's kind of smart what Rooney. I will say this: maybe he's making allies that way. Maybe him and Haslam and Tipper are now Tepper or whatever his name. He has a couple people in his corner when he has to fight, the Crafts and Jones and Snyders of the world. So anyway, other key people that were brought on that season, some guy named Dick LeBeau. I may have heard of him. This is like his second stint with the Steelers. Yes. So Dick LeBeau played for Woody Hayes on the Ohio State National Championship team in 57. He was also an NFL defensive back. He was opposite of Dick Night Train Lane, who we mentioned just in another episode with the Detroit Lions. He was defensive coach with the Bengals. He basically kind of developed the defensive, the zone blitz. But he got fired after the 1989 season because of some guy named Joe Montana kind of like scorched his defense in the Super Bowl. So, Dick LeBeau had it on the origin of the zone blitz. It was a thought process kind of born out of necessity. It was basically an outcropping of the run and shoot offense that was becoming pretty prevalent in the league back then. We were in the same division as Houston, and they were tremendous at it with Warren Moon. Then the West Coast offense was spreading out the league, and those were all quick rhythm, get the ball out of your hands, cut up the defense type of games. We were just looking for ways to pressure the quarterback without exposing their defensive backs. So there you go. That's how Dick LeBeau came up with it. And in 1992, the Dom Capers was the defensive coach. He coached until 97 and left back. So the one smart move in 2007 was Mike Tomlin kept Dick LeBeau because Mike Tomlin was always more of a 4-3. Dick LeBeau's a 3-4, but Tomlin was smart enough not to, mess with success. So another guy on this coaching staff you may have heard of, Bruce Arians. Bruce played quarterback at Virginia Tech. He actually coached under Bear Bryant in Bear Bryant's last game. If you don't know who Bear Bryant is, I'm sorry. He's like one of the most legendary football coaches of all time. He was in Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
I don't know who he is, but he sure is fast. Anyway, he coached in Cleveland. He came to the Steelers as a quarterback coach in 2003. I think Arians was on the infamous the game where they came back, where the Steelers came back and won the game. So,
he was, yeah. And he disagreed apparently with the way
Butch
that they,
Butch Davis,
putting the brakes on everything. Yep.
He was more of a gambling guy, more deep pass. His big saying was "No risk it, no biscuit. You can't live scared." So he definitely liked to go deep a lot, but unfortunately, that would get your quarterback hurt a lot. So. And then another guy named Ben Roethlisberger. He had a great rookie year and then won a Super Bowl the next year. Second year had a great playoffs. Not such a great Super Bowl that year. Third year, definitely Super Bowl hangover. 18 touchdowns and 23 interceptions. So I think that's the most interceptions in a season he's ever had.
That was the year that he had the motorcycle accident. And then that was in like preseason. And then right before the season, he had like an emergency appendectomy. It was like he never really recovered from all of that stuff. And it was a Super Bowl hangover. It was just a bad season.
Yeah, that's probably his worst season as a pro, quite honestly. His fourth year, which is he had a great season that no one pays attention to. He has 32 touchdowns and only 11 interceptions. That's probably one of his best years, and nobody ever says anything about that. And mainly because some guy named Tom Brady throws 50 touchdowns. So I quite honestly, that year before really probably was, his best year. He had some problems with his off-field behavior. He was involved in a motorcycle accident, like we said. when he shattered the windshield of a car with his head. The eyewitnesses said Roethlisberger tried to get up, but it was bleeding. Reports from the scene, the news media indicate the accident was serious, but not life or career threatening. He was hospitalized for, I think, a day or two. But he did end up getting, the Pittsburgh police cited him for failure to wear a helmet and failure to operate his motorcycle properly. Like he didn't have a right motorcycle license or something. And then there was like some signs of his bad behavior. It was kind of like starting to show up. You really didn't notice it, but it was maybe starting. He was known to be rude to the local media, and then he would skip out on paying for meals. So just some kind of like maybe some minor red flags, like, I don't know, maybe somebody's getting a little bit of a big head here. But actually, Lamar Woodley, they had drafted in 2007. He was from Michigan, and he played outside linebacker, and he was really good. He gave the Steelers a solid defensive bookend to help James Harrison not get double teamed. It kind of like ended up being like a Kevin Green, Greg Lloyd situation. It was really good for that defense. Also, Brett Kiesel ends up coming to Beard 2002. He was a 7th round pick out of BYU. He was a specialty pass rusher, but he developed into a very good defensive lineman. Then there's the man, the myth, the legend, who doesn't really get talked about a lot. And Aaron Smith, defensive end. There's going to be a game I talk about this season. I remember this guy was unreal. He was a 4th round pick from Northern Colorado. And in 2008, he made a full recovery from the injury. He returned to starting that year. He recorded 44 tackles, 5.5 sacks. And this Colts game, I mean, it's unbelievable. He literally like tears up the Colts. Of course, Mike Tomlin, he was born in Hampton, Virginia. And it's kind of a weird, like, sociological study. Like he's actually from the same area as Plexico Berskovic. So how do those two guys turn out the way they did? And Mike Tomlin turns out the way he did. If you can figure that one out, you probably have like $1 million government grant waiting for you. No, honestly, think about it. I mean, it's same race, same socioeconomic, same school system. I mean, I don't know. I mean, all I can say is I know Tomlin had a 2-parent family, but does 2-parent really make that much of a difference? I don't know. Anywho, that's the end of our psychology for the. That's enough. If to turn into our sociology,
yes,
I guess,
study
podcast for
you
that.
Can do your dissertation on that.
But I mean, it's an interesting case study. It really is. He actually went to William and Mary Ivy League school, and he was hired as a defensive coach in Tampa Bay by Tony Dungy. And he actually was on the Super Bowl winning team with John Gruden, as Gruden was once again smart enough to keep him on staff. He then hooked up with Brad Childress as a defensive coach in Minnesota, and he was only there for 1 year when the Steelers hired him. He was hired at 34, which continued the streak of Steelers seem to hire coaches in their 30s. And I think that first year he was really a tough disciplinarian, but I think he had to be to get that team's attention. I think he had a veteran team that he needed to show, I'm the boss, I'm the man in charge. And that's kind of what he did. I think he ran down his team a little bit. And that's why it might have been the big reason they lost to Jacksonville in the playoffs, because they were pretty beat up and worn out. But I wish he would brought that guy back out when Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell came to town. That guy would have been pretty helpful.
I wonder if being 34 years old, to your point about like he felt like he had to do that, just being so young, there were probably players that were.
I think I have that in the notes. I think when he coached for Minnesota, there was a guy that was 1 year older there were 2 players that were older than him when he coached in Minnesota. So
I could see definitely having to sort of establish a presence of an authority. Plus, you're also replacing a legend in Bill Cowher, so that couldn't have been easy. It'd be fun to go back and do an episode on that first season, because I think, like you said about Ben having a great year, I don't think people remember much about that year. That was a pretty good season, and that just kind of went south at the end. But
everybody got hurt, and then I don't know. It's just like I said, Ben had. I remember when Ben had that. I think 32 is one of the most, that at the time was the most touchdown passes by a Steelers quarterback in Steelers history at that point. So, I said that toughest schedule in 30 years. Now, I hate when people say, "Oh, the strength of schedule before the season." I think you determine your strength of schedule at the end of the season, not before the season, because you're always basing it off of last year, and things change so much from year to year. And plus, I guess it depends too on when you play somebody, because like if you play a team and their starting quarterback's hurt, that's a lot different than if their starting quarterback's healthy and playing. So there are kind of like weird caveats to that little, strength of schedule thing.
You're right. It's very misleading because teams, the NFL especially, like the team that was supposed to be really good this year isn't. The team that was supposed to be bad is really good. You just never know till you get into the season. And then it's not even just injuries. It's also some team wasn't very good in week 3, but by week 12, they're, one of the best teams in the league.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of stuff too.
Or a team that was really good in week 3 or 5 got a bunch of injuries and now
Yes.
isn't that same team. So,
Yep.
Something else that happens in that season is Tom Brady gets hurt in the season opener and tears his ACL.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, it leads to this rule change where now to hit quarterbacks in the knees as long as your name isn't Michael Vick or Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah, it leads to a rule change where you're not allowed to hit Tom Brady is really what it leads to.
Not a lot. Maybe they should just written it that way. So, I mentioned the injuries. Ed Bouchette on November 6, 2008 wrote an article. Ben Roethlisberger make his 10th straight start of the season at quarterback. The 9th time he already had a separated shoulder by this point. The Steelers, the starters for the Steelers have missed 31 games from their 22 starters, and that does not include their punter, who would bring it to 40, nor their long snapper. So there was a lot of injuries. For Tomlin, he says injuries are as much a part of the game as blocking and tackling. We don't make any excuses in that regard. The people who play for us are the Steelers, and the standard of expectation does not and will not change, Tim. The standard is the standard.
Was this the origin of the standard is the standard?
Pretty close. Yeah. 2008. The
Nice.
standard is the standard. There it is. So there you have it, just in case you were wondering. But there was a lot of people. Willie Parker was injured. Ryan Clark was injured. Mar Woodley even was injured. So key games. I'm not going to go through every game that we played that year because, why should we? Some of the games they lost to Tennessee 31-14. Do you remember? There's one thing that really happens in this that's really memorable.
Yeah, the terrible towel thing.
That's it. Lendell White, who I loved at USC, was a great short yard. Decides that they're leading by a lot in the fourth quarter. Decides it's a great idea to stomp on the terrible towel. I think you should do that at your own risk. As if Cincinnati had learned nothing 2 or 3 seasons before, they didn't share it with Lendell White. So even though they win, and I think Tennessee ends up being the number 1 seed that year. So
they were, but
yeah, they lose.
You might talk about later what happens to them. It doesn't turn out well for them.
No, it's all because Lendell White stomped on the towel.
Yep,
for sure. That's what happened. That's it. Yep. They lose to the Giants 21-14, and this is another one. I hate to use injuries as an excuse, but geez, injuries were really a big reason they lost this game. Ben didn't have the greatest game, and the long snapper got hurt. Do you remember that? And James Harrison had to try and snap a ball over Mitch. He snapped the ball over Mitch Berger's head, who had a torn hamstring and tried to limp back and just had to kick it out of the end zone for a safety. So it was bad.
Yeah, I remember when the long snapper got hurt because he was down and he tried they tried to do the thing where he limps off the field and then he just crumpled to the ground and you're like, oh no, he's not.
Yeah,
he's definitely not coming back. And then you saw Harrison on the sideline warming up as a long snapper. You're like, why? It's why couldn't they just put in the regular? Who was the center back then? Jeff Hardings, I think.
Yeah.
But apparently it's that different of a skill at this point, and yeah, that didn't turn out well.
And it really wasn't anybody's fault. It's like James Harrison's a great defensive player, long snapper, not so much. And like in a key situation, they were in their own end. Ben has 4 picks in that game, but he really only throws one meaningful interception. Eli is clutch and kind of like pulls it out at the end. It was a tough loss, but the Giants weren't a bad team that year.
They were the defending Super Bowl champions. That year.
Yeah. So it was a tough loss. It was a tough loss. The Colts 24-20. Oh my goodness. Now this is like, I was at this game. I went to this game. This was like classic Ike Taylor, if you remember. Like, this is the game where Ike literally had an interception that bounced off his hands and right to Marvin Harrison, who proceeded to run 60 yards for a touchdown. Ike was not burned. He was right there and had the ball in his hands. He just tipped it right to Marvin Harrison. And one of the weirder plays I've ever seen. Troy got burned for a touchdown by Dominic Rhodes late in that game. I remember that. And I remember too, like they had a 4th and 1. I think I remember this team a lot. Like they had trouble like closing out games on offense, especially running the ball. It just seemed like when it came to crunch time and running the ball, they just couldn't do it. And Melody Moore got stood up the goal line of what would have been the big lead. It's only one of the few times the Steelers have ever lost the Colts. And it was a tough game. A tough game for the Steelers. And do you remember that game? Do you remember that game at all, Tim? I don't know why. Why was I there, not you? I think I was with your dad.
Oh, maybe you were. I don't think I was there.
I remember maybe I had tickets or so. I don't know. I remember too, like Aaron Smith. This was the Aaron Smith game too that I meant to mention. Like this is the game where Aaron Smith starts tackling their running back in the backfield. Then he tackles Peyton Manning in the backfield. Then they start double teaming him and they couldn't stop him. Then they start triple teaming him and it's still, they're having trouble. So eventually they give up and they start rolling Peyton Manning out to the other side of the field.
Yeah. Aaron Smith was very underrated. And to your point about like getting stood up at the goal line and the running game, you'll probably cover this, but the offensive line that year is atrocious. It's just a really bad offensive line. And I think that's like 1st and goal from the 1 was never a good place for the Steelers ever that year, or anything in goal from the 1. Like Bettis had retired and they just didn't have the guys up front that were very good. So that was a big problem that year, and that burned them in this game.
Yeah, because if they get that touchdown there, that's game over.
Mm-hmm.
And they literally tried to run up the middle, and Melody Moore just literally got stood up. So, they went to Philadelphia, and they had to play a game in Philadelphia. How do you think that went for them, Tim?
Like it always does in Philadelphia.
Do you realize the Steelers haven't won in Philadelphia since the 60s?
Wow.
That might be since Buddy Parker was coach.
Wow.
It's been a little bit. So they lost 15-6. I think the last time I remember them beating the Eagles was the Donovan McNabb Terrell Owens game. That would have been 2004. Yeah,
could have been.
Yeah, they do not do well against the old school NFC. Like for whatever reason, and I think I've said that before. They don't do well against like Philadelphia, the Giants. Who else? The Green Bay. Washington,
Chicago. They haven't had great success against Chicago either.
Yeah, it's like these old and it's like they just remember. We're the Steelers. We always lose to you.
That's a really good point. I never thought of that, but you're right. Those teams you mentioned, you're right. They don't tend to win those games very often.
Yeah, you remember more. I remember more the games they've won against those teams.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Bears game in 2004 where Bettis ran all over them, or the Bears game in 94 or 95 where they had a shootout and won. I mean, that's bad that I can remember offhand the number of times we've beaten the Bears. I mean, I think the Giants too. I don't think we've beaten the Giants very much either. So, anywho, let's go on to the winning games. We like wins around here, right? San Diego. I I remember like they won that, and I don't have the final score.
It was 11-10. It
Then it
was
was
the
11. It is 11-10. Okay, that is that weird play game.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So Troy Paul, they're like, is this the game where Troy has that crazy interception too?
Yes, where he's
Yeah.
like he dives and he
Dives
puts his hand like between the
under
ball
the
and the
ball.
ground. Yeah,
It was like a snowy day here,
Yes.
and and like there's this crazy play. Like the Steelers take a lead, and I think they needed like they had no time on the clock on like I think it was an offensive play, right? Or no, it was a kickoff.
It was either a kickoff or an offensive play.
offensive.
But the Chargers, because there's no time left, they're trying to lateral.
Lateral, and Troy knocks it down and then picks it up and like ends up in the end zone, and they called him down or something. And so everybody was mad because once again, gambling and we can't, Yeah, I guess it would have the Steelers would have covered if they would have left that.
Wasn't that to that point? I don't know if it's been matched since, but I think at that time it was like the only time an NFL game had ended 11-10 in the history of the league.
Might have been a scoregami. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the gamblers were all sad. But another fun personal story about that game was my kid was in the hospital that game getting a overnight like testing. And it was in Children's Hospital, and we were going in to pick him up like at like 3 or 4 that afternoon. And that was that whatever, or maybe it was 7, whatever it was. I had to pick him up in the fourth quarter of that game as that game was ending. And I walked in and we had the game on the TV in the room. We were waiting and they had to like do some stuff to discharge him. And it was funny because I'm sitting there. I said, we're not going to get discharged after the game is over. And I was okay with it. I was like, nope, fine. And as soon as Troy made that play and the game was over, of course, they walked right in. As soon as they're okay, yeah, we're ready to go. You're ready to go now. So
nice.
That's like classic Pittsburgh. Yeah. Everybody was watching the game. The heck with your healthcare. Yeah. Heart attack. Oh, hold on. I got to watch this play. But it wasn't anything that serious. I joke, but another fun game was versus Baltimore. That was here. That was Jeff Reed kicked a 46-yard field goal in Heinz Field to win it. It was a big win. It was coming off a loss to Philadelphia the week before, and it gave him a lead in the division. Was that the infamous picture of Jeff Reed like holding up like the $5 foot long? Like, was that the one that just like barely snuck in, or am I thinking of another game?
I honestly don't remember the field goal. What I remember from that game was, like you said, the offense that was early in the season. It was like week 4, I want to say.
Yeah.
And
right
like
after the Philadelphia loss.
Right after the Philadelphia loss, the offense was doing nothing. And then they got booed. It was a Monday night game, I want to say. And they actually got booed. The offense got booed off the field in the third quarter. And they came back and they put together this nice drive. Santonio Holmes had a touchdown. And then on the very next play, they hit Joe Flacco and he fumbles, and Woodley picked it up and ran into the end zone. Like they were down by 7, I think. And then they scored 2 touchdowns in like the span of like 14 seconds to take the lead. And that really was a big turning point in the season, because like you said, that gave them a lead in the division. And that comes, that turns out to be huge later, as I'm sure you'll get into the battle with the Ravens that year.
Yeah, and then New England, which they don't win a lot in New England, but there was no Tom Brady, but they smoked the Patriots 33-10. I remember this game was played in a rainstorm. I remember that.
Yeah,
and they had Matt Castle, who wasn't a bad quarterback, but they just, for whatever reason, they could not beat Tom Brady, except for this season. Go figure on that.
Well, the Patriots without Tom Brady that year, they won 11 games.
They won 11-5. They're the only 11-5 team to not make the playoffs, I think. And so, but this was one of the games that probably eliminated them. See, the problem was their 5 losses were all to AFC teams, which really, when you losing to Philadelphia isn't good, but it doesn't hurt you as bad as losing to like an AFC team.
Okay. Because
that's like an earlier tiebreaker than that. Although overall record is still the first, thing. But if you end up in a tie, AFC wins is like one of the earlier tiebreakers. So, another game. How about versus the Dallas Cowboys? A Tony Romo touchdown pass in the third quarter gave him the lead. The lead was extended. Nick Folk converted his second field goal of the day. The Cowboys were up to 13-3 going into the fourth. But Jeff Reed hits a couple field goals, and Deshae Townsend makes a intercepted pass, and that gives the Steelers a 7-point lead, and they held to the end of the game. I think I might have this here. Let me see if I have this.
Romo throws high, intercepted. Townsend. Touchdown, Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that was amazing. I mean, the game was tied with like a minute 40 left, and the Cowboys are driving for what could be the game-winning field goal, and Romo throws a pass that definitely got away from him. And Deshae Townsend, who was never like a star, but was always kind of a really solid player, has a pick six. That was unbelievable. I think when that game happened, that was later in the season. I think I was like, man, this could be a really special team.
Yeah, and it's weird because Dallas is one of the teams that they always beat from, not always, but it seems like they beat more times than they lose to. So, hey, Tim, was Renegade played before the interception?
That was back when Renegade meant something.
Back when I remember Renegade meant something. Now they just play it and it doesn't matter, huh?
That's correct.
And then by a familiar score, they beat Baltimore 13-9. That seems like a popular number around these parts. It's a last-minute pass to Holmes. This is really classic Pittsburgh Baltimore. Tough defense in this game. Ben leads them on a game-winning drive that ends with a Santonio Holmes catch that, well, if you could tell me it's a touchdown, you could tell me it's not a touchdown. I don't know. Go figure, right?
Roethlisberger, first option, shut down. Looking for a second, a third option, now throws it. Man's there. Is he in the end zone? Is he in or outside? They're going to mark him outside, and I guarantee you people are going to want to look at this one.
Well, inside 2 minutes, it can be challenged from up top. If I was the Steelers, I would not call a timeout.
With the eye here, I think his body was in, but the ball was outside. Oh, that's close. Here's even an angle from the blimp.
2 feet or 2 feet.
After reviewing the play, the receiver had 2 feet down in the end zone with possession of the ball. We have a touchdown.
It's a touchdown for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that's a close call there, Tim. I don't know if that was a touchdown or not. It was 9-6 with 30 seconds left, and Ben runs around like it's 5 Mississippi has been counted, and your trends are chasing you. And it's classic Ben. Like you said, the offensive line really wasn't that great that year, so they really couldn't run the ball against anybody. Never mind Baltimore.
Yeah.
And it ends up being a classic, 13-9. They pull off the win. Did William Gay have a big interception at the end of that game too? I think
he had an interception at the end, I think, just to ice it. But
big play, Willie Gay.
But that was that would have been interesting had they stuck with the original call of him being down at the 1, because it was 9-6, and there was 30 seconds left. So I
think that was third down too.
That was third down.
Yeah.
So it would have been 4th and goal from like the inside the 1 yard line.
Oh gosh.
And so you could have kicked the field goal, played for overtime. It was a typical Pittsburgh Baltimore game where nobody was really scoring, or you could have went for the win. But like we said, like 4th and goal from the 1 was not a good spot for the 2008 Steelers to ever be in. So it would have been interesting to see what they would have done. Fortunately, Tomlin never had to make that decision because they did call it a touchdown. And you're right, Steve. It wasn't a bad call. It was just like, man, that you literally could have just flipped a coin.
Yeah, if you could call that either way, and I couldn't argue.
Yes.
Like when you heard that was Phil Simms and Jim Nantz, and Phil Simms was like, here's the blimp shot. If you look at the blimp, it does kind of look like the ball's touching, but I mean, come on, the blimp's like 100 feet away. How good.
But that was
Um,
huge. That play was big.
it's a foreshadowing. Boy, Santonio Holmes making a big catch at the end of the game.
Yeah.
Keep that one in the back of your head, huh? That one might come in handy later. The big win gives the Steelers a bye, and that's what they needed. They had to have the bye this year. Too many injuries, played too many tough games. They needed a bye, and I don't think if they don't get that bye, they probably don't make the Super Bowl. So that gives them big because they get to stay home and rest up. And back then, the first and second seeds both got a bye, and you get to rest up. So just to review, they had a historic defense, and James Harrison was NFL Defensive Player of the Year. And it literally, they set the defensive. They led the defense. Every category, yards allowed, points allowed, passing yards allowed, first downs, yards per play, and yards per pass. So it was a really, really, really good defense. Like I said, I think with Aaron Smith and Casey Hampton up the middle, then you had Ferrier and Larry Foote, and then you had Woodley and Harrison on the outside. And people forget Brian McFadden was a really solid corner on the other side for Mike Taylor. And you had Ryan Clark and Troy Polamalu. And if you took Larry Foote out, you could put in Deshae Townsend. That's why Townsend was in. They were in that extra, defensive back. So, I mean, they really had a really good defense and solid and deep. The problem was they had an inconsistent offense. There really was no consistent passing game or running game. The offensive line was weak. Ben kind of regresses. He finishes with 17 touchdowns and 15 interceptions. He has 3,000 pass yards. It's not really that great of a year. Willie Parker only has 800 yards rushing, 791 and 5 touchdowns. Although Melody Moore has 588 and 5 touchdowns. So they really didn't have that great of a year on offense. They kind of have an offense where they do just enough to win. That's kind of their offense this year. They scored just enough points to get the win. Tough schedule. I alluded. The schedule really is determined after the season, not before. The Steelers finished 12-4. I think every one of the teams, they played both number one seeds in both conferences. Because did the Giants? I looked at it. I forget who ended up being the NFC.
Yeah, it was the Giants.
Giants, yeah. And so they played both of them, and they played the Tennessee. And they played every playoff team in the AFC except for Miami. And Miami only got in because the Steelers beat New England to put them in. So, and there were some teams that weren't good, like Cleveland, Houston, and Cincinnati. But I would argue with anybody that was probably one of the toughest schedules that the Steelers have ever played and been successful with. So I can't.
Yeah, I mean, Philadelphia
They made
ended up
championship
being
game.
in the NFC Championship game. So I mean, yeah, that and like you said, New England wasn't a playoff team, but they won 11 games. So that was definitely a hard schedule.
And I think it beat them up. It really did. But I think Tomlin got smart with resting some of his veterans and stuff. He kind of learned team management maybe a little better than he had the year before his first year. So on to the playoffs. They are going to play the San Diego Superchargers, who were in San Diego, not LA at the time. So I can say San Diego without worrying about making a mistake, right? And they won. The San Diego had won in overtime the week before. The Steelers, of course, had taken care of the bye week, shutting them out, winning. The Steelers. In the story, it's kind of weird. In this game, they really run the ball really well. Like, I remember that. Like, Willie Parker had 146 yards rushing, and he averaged over 5 yards a carry. The Steelers won the time of possession, keeping the ball. I remember that. They kept the ball for the entire third quarter, except for, like, one play, and I think that was an interception. I think it was an interception by Phillip Rivers. So Tomlin did some risky stuff in this game that didn't pan out, like going for it on fourth down. But the defense bailed him out. Phillip Rivers didn't have a terrible game, 3 touchdowns and an interception. Ben only throws 1 touchdown, but more importantly, he doesn't throw any exceptions. And I think the biggest play of this game, let me see here. mm, we have it right here. Here we have a.
You already have it queued up, I think.
Yeah, here's the Santonio Holmes. It's a punt return by Santonio Holmes.
Actually, all these years, everyone's pronounced his last name incorrectly. It's Cypress. So beware, we're going with that the rest of the day as Holmes takes off. Holmes inside the 50, gets past Cypress. Nene has the angle. He gets past him hurdling and takes it in for the touchdown. Santonio Holmes breaks it 68 yards.
Well, the Chargers really didn't have much luck that season. They had to play us twice in the snow in Pittsburgh.
They were
That's-
winning that game 7-0. They had scored like a touchdown on their first drive when that punt return happened. So that was a big play. Santonio Holmes,
Clutch, man.
if you want to talk about just like the greatest, just boil it down to like one season in Pittsburgh sports history, like the greatest single season ever. It'd be really hard to put somebody on top of him. Maybe like Mario Lemieux when they won the cup that second year in '92, maybe would probably be in running. But I mean, man, he just did so much that year and so many huge plays.
Yeah, well, just for Willie Parker, because I like Willie Parker.
But running out the clock here, and Parker taking it toward the end zone, and he's in for a touchdown.
Well, you got a motivated offense, motivated running back, and a defense. You've documented it many times. They've been on the field about midway.
That made it 35-17. I think the Chargers scored another touchdown, but it was kind of like I don't know, like why was the offensive line all of a sudden so good in that game? I don't know, but they were.
Yeah, that was a weird weekend because it was the divisional round and we were the last game. We were like the Sunday 4:00 game or whatever.
And all the home teams had lost.
All the home teams had
Yeah.
lost. Yeah, it was so the two number one seeds in both conferences were upset, and then the Cardinals beat whoever the number 2 seed was in the NFC.
Was it
think it-
Carolina?
Yes, it was Carolina.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
So yeah, you had all these upsets, and then the Chargers had upset Peyton Manning the week before. They came in here, they took a 7-0 lead, but then the Steelers really rolled after that. And like you said, the time of possession, the running game, it was like a game. It was like a game from like a past era, right? Like one of
Yeah.
those old like 90s games that they would have won with 100 and something yards rushing and controlling the clock. And that was not the norm for that team, but that's the way they played that day.
Well, they picked a good time to do it.
You know what else
So-
I remember about that game, Steve, on going back to the special team. So you had mentioned when you read that thing from Ed Bouchette about all the injuries, like if you throw the punter in there, then it's this many games.
Yeah, Mitch
The-
Berger sucked.
Well, the punter that year was Daniel Sepulveda, who they had drafted. I can't remember if it was that year or the year before, but he had like some kind of season-ending injury. So you're right. They signed Mitch Berger, who was just awful. And one of the reasons that they kept the ball so long in the third quarter was Mitch punted to San Diego, and Eric Weddle, who played forever. That dude was on the Rams last year when they won the Super Bowl. He was the kick returner. And it like Mitch Berger was such a bad punter that like Weddle couldn't field the ball because it like it didn't like go in the trajectory that a normal punt would go. And he was like confused and it like hit his helmet or something and it was a muff and the Steelers recovered. I just remember thinking like Mitch Berger's so bad that the other team can't even field his punts. So I don't know why I remember that from that game, but I do.
Well, that was that they kind of rolled and they kind of needed probably a game to roll and they dominated. It ends up being 35-24, but I don't think it was even really that close. I know San Diego had a lead, but I just remember halfway through this game thinking it was over because, like I said, I think Willie Parker had like 5 yards to carry, and I was like,
Right.
if you can run the ball like that, you're gonna win.
Right. That's how those divisional games are supposed
Used
to go.
yeah.
You know, because you have the week off You're playing at home. Sometimes the weather is a factor. Usually those teams, win fairly handily, but that year that didn't happen at all
Yeah.
until that last game of the weekend.
So that leads to Baltimore, who had beaten Tennessee, the number 1 seed. And I didn't write down the score, but it's all because Tennessee stomped on the terrible towel. We all know that for a fact. But so
They also had
Baltimore-
Kerry Collins as their quarterback. That might have had something to do with it too.
Well, Baltimore had Joe Flacco, so go figure. This is one of the biggest games in this rivalry's history, and the Steelers are trying to beat Baltimore for the 3rd time this season, which is not easy in any case, never mind that it's Baltimore. Joe Flacco is a rookie quarterback for the Ravens that year. The Ravens defense still has Ray Lewis and Ed Reed. It's just it's a great game. This is just like probably one of the best games in Steelers history, wouldn't you say, Tim? Probably.
Well, it just, and like you said, the build up to it. I mean, like that was their 3rd time that season. And it wasn't like those two teams just became rivals that year. I mean, they had this really strong history. Both defenses were really good. It was a brutal, physical game. I would definitely put it up there as one of the best games in Steelers. And honestly, even if you're a Ravens fan, I can't. Obviously, they lost, so I can't speak for Ravens fans. But man, I just thought that was like one of those games where both fan bases should have just been proud of how far their teams had come and how hard they fought in that game.
In fact, so far in this game, they've been dropping back, playing pass.
Picked off by Deshae Townsend. The rookie makes the big mistake early, mid-first.
So Joe Flacco throws I think that's a better play by Flacco than a poor pass. A better play by Townsend than a poor pass by Flacco there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Flacco was a rookie, but he had a pretty good season that year. And was that also Harbaugh's first year as their coach? I think it was.
Probably. I don't know. I didn't look it up. How about a big play from the offense? Or no, here we go. This is a fun one. Remember when Troy Polamalu used to leap over the line to stop?
On the Raven line.
Unbalanced line to the left.
Here's the sneak. Flacco, second chance, second effort. And it looks like they're going to mark him short of it. Polamalu was the first to come over the top.
So this is a 4th and 1, or maybe less. And remember, Troy used to jump over. He used to try that. Like, I remember he tried it before this game, but nobody ever noticed because it never worked. And then it works one time, and everybody like, "Oh my God, what a genius!" It's like, dude, he's been trying this for like 3 games. Like, I've seen him try it like a million times. This is the first time it worked. But hey, it was a big situation for it to work. So good for Troy. Well, what a smart player. He was a very smart player. So he's lucky he never got like somebody like just took a step back and tried to chuck a pass on him though. But I mean, would that have worked in that situation? I don't know. All right, how about a big play from the offense here?
3rd down and 9. They're bringing everybody. Stepping away from it, Roethlisberger throws off balance, has Holmes. Holmes cuts back middle past Walker. Sidesteps another hit. Miller down there leading the charges. Washington's going to throw a block, and Holmes has taken it in. Touchdown, Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and then Holmes just makes a great play to not only get open, but then run 40 yards across the field. That you really couldn't beat that Ravens defense for 60-yard touchdown passes unless you had something like that.
So that brings us to what's another good play? I don't know. I'm not playing any Ravens highlights. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for you Baltimore fans. So what do we want? Do we want the big play? Probably one of the bigger plays in Steeler history, Tim? Is that what we're going with?
Yeah, and set it up, Steve. What was the score? What was the
Hold on,
situation?
let me see. Okay, so we are 16-14. Baltimore scored a couple touchdowns to get back in it. Ike Taylor gets called for a couple pass interferences. The offense is doing nothing because they can't run the ball. So let's see. On 2nd and 12 before this play, Todd Heap made a big catch. Okay, so Lamar Woodley gets a sack on 2nd down, and it's 3rd and 13. So that's what it is. It's 3rd and 13. The Ravens are driving. They've played Renegade before this drive, right, Tim?
Yes.
So the defense is going crazy. The crowd's going crazy. And, we need to make a big play because all they have to do is get in the field goal range. I mean, they're at their own 30, and this is Heinz Field in like February. So, this isn't a gimme, right? Were they going into the open end? I think they're going into the
Right.
open
But
end.
like you said, I mean, all they need to do is get in field goal range. There's only 4 minutes left. So
Yeah.
this is like you said, this is a historic defense. So if they're really this legendary defense, this would be the time to make a play.
3rd and 13. Got to make it to the 42 for the first. Picked off Polamalu. Polamalu going right. The field is open. Aaron Smith shields. Flacco. Polamalu takes it home. Super Bowl 43. Pittsburgh might be bound for that thanks to number 43.
It's probably one of the biggest play. And I tell you what's a great call. And I didn't notice this until actually your dad said this. I didn't notice this when I was watching the game. Dick LeBeau put Woodley and James Harrison and Lamar Woodley on the same side on that play. So you couldn't double team them both. And that made, like, if you watch the replay, like James Harrison gets like big time pressure because he's able to get by the inside tackle or guard on that. And that's really what creates the interception on that play. So
Interesting.
Yeah.
I never knew that either.
yeah, I didn't know it until he said that. And when you watch the replay, you can see that 56 and 92 are on that same side. And it's like, oh, that's really tough to stop, So, it's probably one of the biggest plays in team history. I mean, it kind of goes down the list a little bit because there's a couple other plays within this season that might be bigger.
Yeah.
But, it's a great call by Dick LeBeau, and the Steelers are on their way to the 7th Super Bowl appearance overall, and they're 2nd in 3 years. Of course, the offense did just barely enough to win. One other weird thing, I think what's his name? Willis McGahee gets like concussed in this game late in it, doesn't he? And that was like a scandal because they played like down on the corner by
Right.
Credence, and everybody was all upset about that. So
Yeah. Go listen to our Forgotten Stories episode. We got into the ridiculousness of all of that. But man, that was such a great night. When Troy made that intercept, I was at that game. I was fortunate enough to be there, and I had been there for all those AFC Championship game losses at the River Stadium, and then even the Tom Brady one at Heinz Field. And when Troy made that interception, I mean, people were just hugging each other, hugging strangers, jumping on each other. I've never, up to that point, and then since that point, I've never experienced anything like that at a sporting event where people were just had that much like pure joy. It was really cool.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest plays. The Ravens were at their own 14 to start, and that was 6:50, and then that play happened with 4 minutes left, 3rd and 13. Great game between two great rivals. It puts us into the Super Bowl, and if you want to find out what happened in the Super Bowl, tune into our next podcast where we discuss some more. And it's a very interesting Super Bowl matchup. A lot of weird connections between the Steelers and Cardinals, so it'll be fun to dive into those stories and more in our next podcast. Please like us on whatever podcast service you're using. Word of mouth is really helpful, and thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you with part 2, Super Bowl 43, coming up in our next podcast.